All right, we're recording. So to start with, I want to introduce to students and anyone else who is watching this Comm Week interview. This is Daniel Carde. He's a photojournalist based in Beirut, shooting for Getty Images, correct?
I've been stringing for them. I'm a freelancer.
Okay. Okay, excellent. So tell our students a little bit about your path from UTA to where you are now.
Okay, so I started at UTA in the fall of 2016, and I went for journalism, and that's what I got my degree in. My first semester there, which was spring 2016, I took a self-funded trip to Iraq to document what was happening there between Peshmerga and the fight against the Islamic State. Um, Went back, earned my degree while I worked at the Shorthorn, and then I graduated spring 2018. After that, I ended up doing an internship with the Dallas Morning News for 6 months. And then I freelanced for about a year in San Antonio. And I then, actually less than a year, about 6 or 8 months. And then I moved to Beirut.
Okay. So what took you to Beirut?
Um, well, I wanted to live in Iraq, but when I was in Iraq, I met some friends there and they said Beirut's the better place to live. There's more bureaus there. There's a little bit more happening. And so I just decided to go there, hoping to get a little bit more work from that area and worked around the region in North Africa as well as in Europe. And it seemed like a pretty good place to be based out of. The pretty good flights from around there. And so
Okay.
decided to settle there.
So you mentioned you're a freelancer.
Yes.
Is it hard to make a living that way? How do you go about it? How do you go about selling your images and promoting yourself?
It is pretty hard to make a living at it. A lot of places already have their photographers that they work with, and they can usually continue to work with them a lot. Um, Luckily enough, it's about making connections, taking advantage of all the connections you have when you have the opportunities to make them. Um, like when I was at UTA, all the professors there that worked networking at the Shorthorn, people that would come in, I was just networked that way. And thankfully, they were able to help me get set up with some of their contacts. So when I moved, but I also worked for a wire service called Zuma Press. And so I can send them stuff in and then they find buyers, but they take a portion of the profits as well. And it's coming up with story ideas. So that's something that's always been kind of hard for me to come up with, but that's something that's, you need to be good at, is coming up with story ideas. And yeah, I mean, really using that network system that you have set up.
Okay. Now you mentioned that you're a stringer for Getty Images. Can you explain to our students what that is and how you got involved with that?
Yeah, give me one sec. I got a thing popped up. Okay, can you say that again? Something was blocking my thing.
Oh, sure. So you mentioned you're a stringer for Getty Images. Can you
Yeah,
explain to our students what that means and how you got into doing that?
yeah. So stringers pretty much just a freelancer for them is all it means, but they call us stringers because I guess back in the day it meant they were stringing us along. And yeah, and that's what I've heard. I haven't really heard anything too different from that from the people that have told me about it. Um, I just thankfully I met Getty staff photographer when I was living in Dallas, who was also a UTA alum. And when I got here, I just was really persistent. I kept, because I did a little bit of work for them in Texas. When I got here, I kept hitting them up saying, "Hey, who's the person here? Can you put me in contact?" And I kept pestering them for about a month and a half. Eventually, they got me in contact with who I needed to, and I did some work for them here. And that's kind of how it happened. And I guess they liked the work I did because the moment the explosion happened here in August, I Getty editor was the first person I called, and he was like, "Yeah, go ahead. You can work for us if you feel safe."
Okay.
So, yeah.
So a student specifically asked about that. What were the top takeaways or lessons that you have from covering the explosion as a photojournalist?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's wow. Uh, I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question. That's a good one. You need to get out there and do it, but also make sure you're being aware of what you're doing. I mean, there's a dead person, and I could have gone up and photographed just a gory picture of a dead person, but that doesn't serve a purpose other than to, show death, and that's not the point. So when I photographed a dead person in the road who was covered, I tried to do it in a way that just included it as a scene photo. So I think those are important things to have, is also making sure you're still treating everyone with respect and dignity. This was, I felt, was a bit different of assignment than other assignments were, because I lived through the explosion. I know the same fear that everyone else was having. I had that fear. And so I felt like I was covering my own story for myself. And so that kind of also guided me when going through and doing it. A lot of that was on autopilot though. So I remember all the elements, but I don't always remember what I was thinking when I was doing it. But it's really about making sure you're respecting everyone, and knowing the purpose that you're there, making sure you're not getting in the way, making sure you're not being a problem. Those are really important questions to ask yourself, especially when you're going in, is why am I here to do this? Like, what is my point of being in this situation? Am I helping the situation? Am I showing what's happening? Or am I just getting in the way and being a hindrance to everyone who's doing search and rescue and other operations? I don't know if I hit that or not. I feel like I kind of wandered, but sorry.
Yeah, no. And I'm sure, it was a very unique situation. So I'm glad you're safe. I was glad to hear you were safe, for sure. That's the utmost thing. So you talked about setting and things like that. How do you tell a story with photojournalism, and why do you feel like the photography aspect is important for telling a story?
So for telling a story, you want to show it from a bunch of different, you show a bunch of different images for it to combine it to kind of show what's going on and tell a story with it. I mean, there are two types of things. You can do a photo essay or a photo story. But for photo story, I personally think they should be worked on over a longer period of time, and you follow the person and you try to narrow in on why the story is important. As they say, it's like an onion, and you want to find something that has a bunch of different layers and that you slowly peel back and get into. You don't want to just show the exterior. And it's important to show people. I mean, representation matters. Seeing people in the situation to me, has a much more of an impact than just words alone. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And when you see the expression, when you see the moment, when you see the person's eyes, I mean, to me, that just becomes so much more relatable than, just seeing it in words. And if you have, good photo and good words, then I think you have a really powerful piece.
Right. Okay. Do you do any multimedia, any video, or is it mainly still photo?
I've done a little bit of video a long time ago. I'm actually trying to get back into that. That's actually something I really want to get back into. It's kind of hard. I need to get out and start doing other stuff where I just focus on the video. During the explosion, when we were wandering around the city, I did take some videos, and I showed it to one of my buddies, and he was like, those are good moments because it's a historical thing, but he's like, you got to, when in those situations, you just need to focus on one and the other. And I mean, he's right, it's a tough thing. And so I'm trying to get more into video. I really would like to do more video. I think it's a very important piece, especially the audio. I mean, when I was out photographing after the explosion, some of the things alone, it was distinctly the audio. And that's why I wanted to film it, is because the audio was something I felt was not going to show up in the photos. You weren't going to hear the glass of people walking on it, the constant sound of glass, the constant sound of sirens and alarms going off in all the buildings. And those were very powerful things involved in the scene. So I really wanted to try to document some of those sounds. When I first started filming, I think I was thinking about it as a sound thing and then trying to make an audio slideshow, but I never ended up doing that with it.
Okay. So when you're wanting to convey things that you can't necessarily hear or feel, how do you do that as a photographer? Do you add that to the captions, or do you try to frame the photos in a certain way that you develop a better sense of things that can't necessarily be seen?
Well, sometimes I think there are moments within things. There's moments in between the popular moments. There's moments between the crying and the smiles and the laughing. There's these just little moments that kind of come up, and if you can capture those, I feel like they will tell those emotions so much better. And so I try to capture those, but also with the captions as well. But it's, to me, I feel like the better images are the ones that the photo tells the story itself, and then the captions just supplemental.
Right. Okay. Oh, and with your freelancing, do you write a lot of your own captions?
I do and I don't. It depends on the situation. For the Getty image, for the explosion one, Getty was allowing me just a file, and they were doing all the captions for me, so that way I could just focus on photographing. And then after a few days, then they started giving me a template, and so I fill out the first portion, but the second sentence of the template, they just wanted to use that. Other clients, I am responsible for the entire caption and all the cut line information as well. So it's also part of being a photojournalist, is gathering all the information.
Right.
So you do
And it's a hard skill. That's a hard skill. Um, That's one that I'm working on with my digital storytelling students now. Having the caption not just restate exactly what's in the photo, but to try to add something new and convey a little bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes, I mean, I've had really good images and people didn't want to give me their information, and that's always the worst, because man, this is such a good photo.
Right.
You got to respect that they don't want to give it to you. I mean, there's always a time and a place. There's times I don't get people's information and I run the photo because I think it's an important photo.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I usually don't. Most stories I don't think warrant that kind of thing. Or most times I think you need to have the information. So you need to go up and know how to talk to people. To me, since I can be awful shy and not necessarily a person like that, having the camera gives me a purpose. And so kind of, allows me to talk to people and get more confident in what I'm doing, and helps that way when I talk to people and gather information from them.
Yeah. So you don't just hide behind the lens, you actually
No,
interact. Yeah.
Yeah, we are reporters. Yeah, it's part of the important part of the thing is photojournalist. So it's not just the photo side. I wish it
Right.
was.
Right. It's a good point. So some folks have asked about your life in Beirut. Generally, how do you think your identity as an American photojournalist affects your work in other countries, and Beirut in particular? How do people respond to you?
So definitely a white American photojournalist is definitely puts me at a very privileged position of power. Um, I've had this conversation with my girlfriend. She's Lebanese, and we've spoken about it as well. That if I was a black person, I probably wouldn't have as warm of a welcoming. But because I'm white, I get very strong welcoming. And I mean, a lot of people come up and talk with me, and when I tell them I'm an American, um, they get a lot of times they get really happy, and they're like, "Oh, take me with you," or I love America and things like that. And so I think in some ways it can be really good. I mean, it's beneficial. There's times I've been on assignment and I know the only reason the soldiers didn't beat me is because they found out I was an American. And I was watching them hit other journalists, and I was photographing that. And I got hit with a rock, and then another soldier was about to hit me and telling me to move. And I kept photographing, and I was like, I'm American, and then he realized, and I could tell it went from I'm about to be hit to not. And so I feel in those situations, it can be dangerous for us. I mean, too, we can still get arrested and deported or whatever. But I feel like when you have that position, like you should use it to, like, I mean, I knew I probably could have stopped photographing, but I figured I'm going to get a few more. And, and it definitely can come with perks, but it can also make you a target in other ways. You got to kind of balance out what you're doing and kind of understand what's going on. I mean, I know there's a protest that happened a couple months ago at the U.S. Embassy. That one probably would have been really bad for me to show up to. So, trying to be at least conscious of things like that. But I think overall, being an American, a white American photojournalist, is definitely, those privileges are, I mean, they're very there, and people, I think it's helped in some ways. But it also, in some ways, as a photographer, then people want to come up and talk to you more, so you're not really blending in as much. You're now, someone that they're coming up to talk to more, and they want to have more of a conversation. That can also kind of hinder photography. So you kind of got to get the balance of being able to maneuver around where they don't see you, or figuring out a way how to kind of just get conversations to stop when you want them to stop. So.
Yeah, gotcha. Sort of related, because you mentioned some of of the potential violence of being a journalist, um, what are you most afraid of as an American photojournalist working in another country?
Being targeted for being American. I mean, like, right now there's Hezbollah here, and I've heard like, um, fuck America and things like that. And I mean, I try not to really respond to it because what they're saying doesn't bother me. It just scares me. Like, oh, if they find out American, what if they attack me? And so, I mean, that has been something. But for the most part, I'm not too concerned about most things like that. And most of the time, everyone's been really calm and nice and helpful. But those are some things. I mean, naturally, Hezbollah scares me a bit anyway. But that's from previous things that have happened to other journalists. And overall, my biggest fear would be that if they caught me, I'd end up in Syria or not. Because I've covered things with Hezbollah, so it's not like if they know I'm there, they're going to kidnap me right away. But if anything turns sour, I could be a target just because I'm an American. And yeah, but for the most part, it's not too many fears of it that I really get to. I mean, there are other places to be more scared of, and they're trying to read the situation. And I mean, I just let people say what they want to say about America. I know a lot of them, it isn't necessarily what they're saying isn't necessarily that they hate actual Americans. It's just our politics and our government and things like that. And so I just let people express themselves and, just try to be there to photograph it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously we have this pandemic going on. It's a worldwide thing that's changed things everywhere. So our students here are obviously experiencing it. You're experiencing it where you are. How has the pandemic changed your work?
So I first thought I'd be getting a lot of assignments. And then a few days after I arrived, coronavirus showed up and it was documented in Lebanon. And then within a few weeks, the airport shut down. So literally, like, I never really planned to work in Lebanon and Beirut. I planned to work like in Iraq and go to Ukraine and Libya and places around like that. And so suddenly all these things that I planned to do and have more of a knowledge in were no longer things that I was going to be able to go document and work on. And then also a lot of publications have stopped answering any pitch. They don't respond. Unless it had some sort of coronavirus directly related tie, they didn't really care. And so, I mean, it definitely has influenced things. I've had other people say, we just don't have the freelancer budget right now. We've spent all of it covering Corona and on Corona related things. And so, I mean, I know that's also putting a hindrance on getting assignments as well. I mean, those are very important stories. There's other work too, and I sometimes think that maybe Corona makes people forget about other stuff that's happening. I'm not trying to discount the importance of what the story is, but it happened. So.
Okay. It's been several months. Has there been any change, or is that still the focus?
Well, that's kind of the international focus. That's a lot of the international people that don't really want to have a lot of stories unless it's Corona related. Now, because of the explosion, people have an interest again in Beirut and in Lebanon. But even that, I know they're also wanting stories that tie into how coronavirus and the explosion kind of interlapped, which we did start seeing a rise in cases. But I mean, I know after the explosion, they were stacking 12 people into an ambulance and rushing them off because they were trying to get people out of there. So I know that put people in danger. But and there's protests happening, or there were some protests happening, and other news organizations were starting to get a huge interest in that. But I think that also tied in because of the explosion. So I think that explosion kind of put this little thing of there are stories right now that people care about, because there's always going to be stories, but just trying to get publications that care. So.
Well, you mentioned protests. As you've likely heard, been a number of protests here in recent months as well. What advice would you give to students who want to cover those sorts of events?
Again, I think it's very important to understand why you're there. If you're only there to build your portfolio, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Look into some safety issues, because it's very important that safety things. I mean, you could be targeted. I've seen plenty of journalists targeted by police. It was, indiscriminately, whether treating them as if they were participating in the protests. Have a buddy have some that you're in contact with, have someone outside that knows that you're there and what you're doing. No photos worth, your life or getting assaulted, but I mean, those are things that do happen, unless, I don't know. And also make sure you remain neutral. You can't be an activist when you're a journalist. You can't participate in what they're doing. Whether you agree with the ideology of the protest or you oppose it, you're not there for that. So don't chant, don't do anything that blurs the lines of what you're there as, because that puts all journalists in danger. But have a reason there, know a little bit of medical stuff, know some things. Go over your own ethics before you go. At what point do you stop photographing and render aid? I mean, these are all things that you need to be able to live with as yourself as a photographer, but you also still have to make sure you're able to, go by photojournalism ethics. But, you as a person, these are things that you should really know before you go in is when would you stop to help? When wouldn't you? What are you there to do? I mean, what are you okay with allowing to happen in front of you and things like that?
Okay. Well, switching gears a little bit to kind of the tech aspect, but what do you shoot with? What do you carry with you when you're...
I'm a Canon photographer. I have a Canon 1DX, Canon 5D3, a 16 to 24, 16 to 35 f2.8 lens, 70 to 200, 24 to 70, and a 300 prime. And then I got 2 speed lights and a little remote. And yeah, I mean, that's generally I use my 24 to 70 and my 70 to 200. But, I mean, it all depends on what you're covering. But I think my workhorse is my 24 to 70.
Okay. And do you edit your own photos?
I do. I do post-production. As far as what I use for that, there's a ingest file application called Photo Mechanic. And that allows me to get my photos in, and I can put like a template for copy or for all the cut line information and things like that are needed for the metadata. It allows me to do that really quickly, and it also puts them on my computer really fast. A lot of times when I'm in the field, I can select the photos while I'm doing it that I want to go back and take a look at, because I think that's a good enough of a photo. So I'm also kind of editing in the field. And then I get back and I hurry up and I try to go through, whittle those down really fast, get those, edited as quickly as I can for post-production, try to do as minimal amount as possible, but try to show what you saw, and then get them filed to the client as quick as I can. But I use Photoshop and mostly Photoshop and Photo Mechanic for all photo related stuff.
And is there any editing you do in the field? Do you carry a laptop or a tablet with you, or is it mainly
sometimes.
all?
Well, during protests and stuff, I actually carry in my backpack, I have a little ThinkTake camera bag. I have my 13-inch MacBook Pro, and I keep that in an external hard drive, and I'll photograph for 45 minutes in an hour, especially when I'm working for a wire, because they're trying to beat other photojournalists that are there as well to get the search engine optimization or whatever and get their images out there. So I'll photograph 45 minutes to an hour, go find a spot where I feel comfortable enough to, ingest from, and then I use the personal hotspot on my phone, edit some images real quick, get them filed in, and then I go back to photographing. Sometimes it's hard because if there's a huge crowd, you have to walk quite a ways away to get away from that so you can get a strong enough of a connection that you can transmit the images via phone. But sometimes I do. It just depends on the client and what it's for. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes they're like, oh, you have a few days before you need to get them to us. I still always try to edit and do all my photos right away. I think the longer you wait, the harder it is to remember certain things about it. So I try to do all my images shortly after I photograph them.
That's great advice.
Yeah, don't wait.
So you've taken my digital storytelling class, actually one of the first semesters that I taught it. And so you know that I do allow my students to shoot with phone. Do you ever, even for your own personal use your phone for photography?
Yeah, I use it a lot, especially because it's light. I try to keep my DSLR with me a lot because I feel when I don't have it, then the phone is just a paperweight. And there's definitely technical limitations of what phone can do compared to my DSLR, but I use my phone a lot. I find to photograph with that. And the best camera you have is one, or the best camera there is the one you have. So if that's all you have is your phone, use it. You can do it well, and there's still things you can do with it. So.
Yeah. Is there any particular advice you have for taking a great photo on your phone?
No, I mean, they're all still pretty much the same. Try to get close if you can. But you use the thing with having a phone is your lens is your legs. You have to move in if you want to get a nice tight photo. You have to step away from it. That's your zoom, and so make sure you change up your photos when you're doing that. Get some close photos, get far away. I know the sensor is a bit different. Like I get glare more from my phone, so just try to use the lights and like when you're photographing, use they always say set your background up and then photograph from there, like background, and come forward your subject and then to the foreground, and just so try to build from that way up. And that way you can try to set up, so, this photo or this light is distracting, let me move it away, so that way I can either hide it behind my subject or it's out of the frame, and try to work it that way.
So it takes a little bit more effort.
Yeah, it does take a bit more effort. But I mean, these are still all things that you use with your DSLR. I mean, except for, you might use your zoom more.
Right.
But these are still all things that you'll do with your DSLR. I mean, they all help each other. You get good with your phone, they all add onto each other.
Well, one more question on my list. Since there is so much risk and uncertainty in photojournalism, why do you do it?
I've asked myself this a lot, and I've had conversations with other freelancers, and I've literally tried to think about what else I would do if I wasn't being a photojournalist. I can't think of anything else I would do right now. And so to me, that kind of says, well, this is what I need to stick with. But it's not about the money, that's for sure. I mean, I'll never be rich doing this. I care about the story. I care about history. I care about documenting these things. Like, to me, photography is a talent that I work hard at, and I have it because I work hard at it. And I feel like I should use this is how I can use my talents to try to inform the world and, make an impact and help that way. So, that's why I do it. But also, I can't think of anything else I would do. Like some of my other friends, they know what they would do if they stop it. I don't, so that kind of keeps me doing it as well.
It's kind of in the blood, right?
Yeah, like I can't explain it. Like you said, it's in the blood. It's just something that's there. It's one thing that makes sense to me to be doing, whereas I don't know what I'd be doing without this. So.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, if anyone else has any questions, they can always reach out to me via some social media that I have. And I'll respond to them if they have anything that they would like to ask or talk to me about.
Okay. And I'll be sure to share your social media with our students. I thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.
Don't go away.